Hey everyone, Warwick's here. So we're back with another Evoker guide. Today it's Devastation Evoker, because it's the next one alphabetically. So Devastation Evoker has been one of my favorite range specs right now, obviously now next to Devourer, but always they're right there with like Demonology Warlock for me, from perspectives of fun, but I also love the visuals of the spec, especially the Scale Commander spec. So it's always been one of my favorite range specs, and I'm excited to get back into playing it again this particular expansion with some of the changes that have been made. So this video is a guide intended for level 90, patch 12.0 in midnight, so the first season, really the first part of the first season. This guide is always, as my guides always are, always intended to be aimed at beginner or even intermediate level players. If you're an advanced Evoker player looking for a guide, I kind of question why you're looking for a guide anyways, because you're an advanced player, you should already know this. But my intention with my videos is always to help players that maybe either don't have the time or just don't have the ability to know where to find this information, find the information that they need to give themselves a foundation for success. Now, I always encourage people to play around with talents and builds and little quirks in the rotation and stuff like that to try and find something that's going to be the most comfortable for you. Or as we continue to learn about these specs, there might be little quirks that pop up over time where we will be where we'll be finding like new intricacies and stuff like that that we can play. But this is just intended to kind of give you the baseline of what you need to get started in order to be moderately successful at like 99% of content that the game offers. So what do we discuss in these videos is you're going to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of the spec. We're going to talk about the talent builds, the rotation, the secondary stats you should be aiming for once you get to like the highest level gear you're going to obtain, the consumables and enchants that you'll need. And then we'll look at some weapons and trinkets that you should be trying to target in this particular patch. So let's start with the strengths and weaknesses of the build. So from a strength perspective, I really like the Devastation Evoker damage profile. Has really strong AoE and can also do really good priority damage. So in a raid fight, for example, if there's an ad that pops up, your ability to target switch to them and do good damage quickly is very high. Really strong utility spells through things like Zephyr, Rescue, Source of Magic, Time Spiral, or Spatial Paradox. That's available to all Evokers. These classes from a raid perspective brings a ton of utility that is really valuable to a spec itself. It does have really good cleave in 2 targets and spread cleave within that 25-yard range that it has. Really good. I think it's actually one of the more tanky specs in the game because Obsidian Scales now has the Renewing Blaze passive locked into it, where it heals you based off of the damage that you take. So if you can proactively defensive, you're going to be really, really survivable. Plus you have strong armor that comes out of that. And then you have your own healing through Verdant Embrace and Emerald Blossom. Really good mobility with Hover having 2 charges in a pretty decent duration. Obviously you have Glide, which is always like good. We see it how it's really good with Demon Hunter, obviously really good here on Evoker as well. And then of course you have your, although you use it almost primarily for damage, but you can use Deep Breath and your Verdant Embrace even as a way to relocate. So you can see Verdant Embrace over to our Demon Hunter friend here that's getting some reps in on the training dummies. You can do a little bit of off healing through things like talents with like Scarlet Adaptation with, you know, if you're out of range of the boss at the 25-yard range because you're moving out of a big circle mechanic, where you can throw an off heal or 2 through Living Flame or Emerald Blossom just to provide that little bit of support to your targets. Little things, but it can mean a lot. Now, but like mostly I think the strength of this spec is the fact that it has a really good damage profile. Now the tuning is another thing, we'll see. But I think from a damage perspective, this spec I think is being a little slept on in terms of its potential damage output. Now, weaknesses. Some people may see this as a weakness. I personally don't, because I'm a melee Zug Brain player that has been transitioning to these mid-range specs in Devourer and the Evoker class as a whole. But the 25-yard range, I know for some people, is a huge drawback on how they feel about the spec. For example, I know a couple of my guild members have said like they can't play Evoker because they're used to being, you know, 40-yard Andes that basically stand out in the middle of nowhere and into the depths of Narnia in order to cast and do damage, and having to get a little bit closer just to do that feels like it's it's like an active state of gameplay that isn't there. Now, I'm someone that's transitioning basically as a melee player into playing these mid-range specs. So for me, standing closer to an encounter doesn't bother me at all because I've been doing it for years at this point. So depending on your viewpoint, the 25-yard range can sometimes be seen by a lot of players as a weakness of the spec. Because of our mastery, where we do more damage, the more health the target has, we do have sometimes still have threat issues, where when we try to pop like a big mass disintegrate or a giant pyre right on pull, because of the mastery that we have, we'll just sometimes yank threat without any cause for it. They've made adjustments to it over the time and made it better, but it still happens every now and then. The defensives, I mentioned that if you are proactive with your defenses, you're one of the most tanky specs in the game. But if you don't have the ability to proactively spark your defensives, then you're going to be in a situation where your defensive reactivity, like your reactive defensives, are pretty bad. You basically are just healing yourself and praying, or hoping that your healer catches you fast enough before you die. And then for some people, obviously, when the dragon form, you don't see all of your transmog and stuff like that. So a lot of people are consider that a downside of the class itself. I would love to have the ability to do permanent visage form. I like the dragon form personally, but I know a lot of people don't play this class because, you know, the mog that you work so hard on building, you can't see it while you're actively in combat. And that matters to a lot of people. Some people it doesn't. I don't really care, but I just wanted to point that out. All right, let's look at raid builds now. Now, for raid builds, Skill Commander right now is kind of outpacing Flame Shaper to the point that I'm not even going to put up Flame Shaper builds in this. I think it's the gap is kind of that big right now. Flame Shaper probably needs a little bit of love. But the big reason is that Skill Commander does have mobility because you have higher hover uptime. And when you're spamming a lot of disintegrates, especially in single target, that higher hover uptime is really, really good. Now, you can run Flame Shaper, it's fine, but you're going to be doing enough of a damage loss that I think it'll be noticeable between the two specs. And that's, again, why I'm not really going to be putting up a Flame Shaper build. Now, if you want one, I can link one maybe in the comments. If you ask for one, I can give you one, but for the most part, I don't think it's even worth looking at Flame Shaper right now. So, for this raid build, obviously you want to make sure that you're taking as many of your core raid utility talents as you can, which is going to be Source of Magic, Rescue, and then either Time Spiral or Spatial Paradox. Up to you which one you want to take. Spatial Paradox is really good if you really need big movement and you have something like a Holy Priest that still needs to do some casting and can't because they're moving. Things like that will be really good. Time Spiral is also really good. I think this talent choice node is really just fight dependent. If there's a space where using your movement cooldowns twice in like a 10-second or 20-second period is going to be really useful, then Time Spiral is one of the best abilities in the game. So, kind of fight dependent on that, but you kind of pick and choose as you need to. Now, from the spec tree standpoint, the big thing that you want to make sure that you're focusing on and that you're thinking about with this is that you're focusing a lot on single target damage, which means you're focusing a lot on disintegrate damage. So you want to take talents that really amplify disintegrate. So you get your arcane intensity, which gives you more disintegrate damage. You're getting things like shattering stars, which is going to help you with that. And then you're coming down here for things like power swell, azure celerity, giving the additional tick, scintillation, giving you the Eternity Surge proc, things like that. So you're really leaned heavily into your disintegrate damage with this build. You'll still have Pyre baseline, and there might be times where it's okay, but right now we're not running Charged Blast in the single target raid build, so you're not having to like charge up a Pyre and then at 20 stacks you're launching that Pyre off into your target. Even in single target, you're not doing that. You're basically only going to be using Disintegrate as your spender for your Essence, or when you get your Essence Burst procs, it's basically going strictly to this. Now, one talent I do want to talk about here, and it's going to cause a little bit of run. I talked about this in my previous Devastation video, but this is Strafing Run. So between this talent and Imminent Destruction, what happens is that when you Deep Breath, you're going to gain this buff that gives you a reduction of the cost of your Disintegrates from 3 to 4, and it stacks up to 8 times. Now, the big thing is that this Imminent Destruction does not impact when you get free essence burst spenders. So if you are spending an essence burst disintegrate, it's not going to count away from this imminent destruction stack that you have. Now, strafing run allows you basically to deep breath twice in the time frame within a certain window. And then you have the talent recall, which we don't take in this build. That's not really relevant, but basically you can deep breath twice so that you can really like stack up something. Now the big thing is that deep breath does also leave a dot on your target that lasts for 12 seconds because of maneuverability in your hero talent tree. So there's going to be some gameplay loop where you kind of want to watch the maneuverability dot to make sure that it's there. That way you can fly back and extend that dot basically for as long as you want. But it does say the duration of this is also extended when deep breath is cast multiple times. So the viability of both like watching the dot and then deep breathing and going over is there, but then also just deep breathing there and deep breathing to one space and deep breathing back is also going to be viable because you're going to get the extended duration on the dot anyways. So we'll talk about how that impacts the thing rotation wise, but I want to point that out is that this build with Scale Commander leans heavily on disintegration and deep breath being the big thing for the build. And the hero talent tree is one small thing I want to point out is Slipstream is what I'm taking for now, but if you want to take Nimble Flyer and get that AoE damage reduction while you're hovering, then that I think is a perfectly acceptable thing. Deep breath, because you're using it every minute, means that you can be a little bit more liberal with your hover usage because you're always going to reset a charge of hover when you deep breath itself, and that counts for both instances of deep breath. So lots of ways to be able to kind of on demand have mobility in place, which is why I'm running Slipstream at least at this point in time. All right, for Mythic Plus, oh wait, why am I stuck in combat? Oh, it's because this Demon Hunter's in combat. Fun stuff. Fun bug. All right, I will be right back. All right, and we are back. Apologies for that. Basically what happened is I Verdant embraced our friend here, and it put me into a perma combat mode because he had been sitting there just spamming himself at the dummies for the entire time I've been recording so far. So had to log out to get out of combat so that I could change talent builds and go from there. All right, I know I haven't talked about the Apex talent yet. We will here after we talk about this M plus build. So this M plus build only makes really one major change in the talent tree, the spec talent tree, and that's to grab Charge Blast, because in Mythic Plus you will be using Pyro a little bit more than what you will in single target. And in the class tree, you're just making sure that you grab other useful talents. So you're trading out Rescue for Oppressing Roar, and you're grabbing Cauterizing Flame. You can still find a way to grab Rescue. You can trade off things like Terror of the Skies, where you're removing that stun. In order to grab Rescue, you can even trade out something like Spatial Paradox if you're running with like a Shaman or a Mistweaver or something that's already like a very mobile healer. You can trade out this point in order to grab Rescue if you'd like to, and then grab Poon Guardian if you choose to do so after that. So like there are some flex points and how to work your utility based off of your group comp, but you need really to have to think about that. But other than that, the build pretty much staying the same. We're leaning, you lean into a really heavy Disintegrate build through Mass, because Mass Disintegrate is so big. And with this talent now, you're striking 4 targets with your Mass Disintegrate instead of 3, which means that, your AoE spending is, if you have Mass Disintegrate charge up, you're using it on Disintegrate. Other than that, you're spending it on Pyre, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. But let's talk about your Apex talent now, and that's Rising Fury. So much like Augmentation, where it's tied heavily to Breath of Eons, Devastations is tied tightly to Dragon Rage. Now I'm a little concerned about this because I hate when there's a lot of talent baked into, or a lot of talents that enhance your cooldowns, because I'm always a little worried about it. But having messed with this a little bit on the target dummies, I do think that there is a little more of a refined approach taken to this, but I'm still concerned. Basically what it does is that when Dragon Rage is active, you gain Rising Fury, which gives you 4% haste, stacking up to 5 times, so it stacks up to a maximum of 20 seconds. Now remember, when you use empowered spells while Dragon Rage is active, you will extend the duration of Dragon Rage. Now that bonus extension duration reduces every time you use an empowered spell, so it's not like you can do an infinite Dragon Rage. But I think it is very possible to get the 20, you need 30 seconds of uptime basically. I think it's very possible in order to gain that 20% haste especially once you start getting some gear and you get your stats optimized and stuff like that. Once you hit 5 stacks of Rising Fury, you will gain another, just a flat 15% damage increase. But then when Dragon Rage ends, you get Rising Fury for 4 seconds for every stack of Rising Fury that you had. So if you had your full 5 stacks for 20 seconds outside of your cooldown, the next 20 seconds after that, you're still gaining that increased damage, that increased haste. Rising Fury does grant the damage and haste bonuses accumulated from Rising Fury. It generates Essence Burst every 4 seconds as well, so you're guaranteed like a bunch of these free procs and stuff like that. It's a really powerful Apex talent that is tied so tightly to your Dragon Rage, but the total duration of everything can last up to close to a minute, and then you're on a 2-minute cooldown with it. So you're not as peak and valley as like old Fire Mage used to be with Combustion, which is why they had to always keep them do Combustion CDR to keep Fire Mage uptime in Combustion really high, because that was the intended loop. You're kind of doing the same here, but with a slightly different approach to everything. So I think it's a good Apex talent, but I am very concerned about how it will impact tuning down the line, because it is really good. All right, so let's kind of talk about the rotation. And I mentioned that the strafing run talent was going to play a big factor in this. So one of the things that you'll likely do is when you start a fight in single target is you're gonna, want to run in and generally hover in because it'll cover more ground. But once you get there, you're going to deep breath. You're gonna Dragon Rage, Eternity Surge with your tip the scales, and then you'll Breath of Fire at rank 1, and then you'll channel your 2 Disintegrates. You're gonna Azure Sweep, and then Living Flame as filler. And as you can see, we get our buffs back and go from there. Now I took damage because one of these was a target dummy, and then basically at this point you're in your spending. You can see I've got 6 stacks of this right now, and I'm spending. You want to put those back out so we get our masses. But you can see, like, even at my low gear levels, I'm struggling to spend all of these. Now, when things like heroism, potential power infusion start to come into play, you'll see that the ability to spend those strafing run, reduced cost disintegrates and stuff like that are going to end up being a little bit easier to do overall. So it just kind of depends on what you're looking at for that. The big difference in AoE is that when you don't have Mass Disintegrate, you will be casting Pyre as your Essence Spender, and then when you have 20 stacks of Pyre through the Charge Burst setup, you will also be casting Pyre. That's really the only difference. Other than that, you're wanting to make sure that you are getting as many Mass Disintegrates out as possible and things like that. You can use Azure Strike as well outside of the Azure Sweep talent. Now let's talk about the Azure Sweep talent real quick from a rotation standpoint. The reason that we're taking it right now is because it is going to be part of your Season 1 tier set bonus, which I'm not talking about in these videos because it's not been released just yet, but it is something that will have small alterations to your gameplay, but nothing significant. Here, because Azure Sweep gets a damage boost at the 2-piece bonus, that's why we start to include Azure Sweep in this build. If the Season 1 tier piece didn't include Azure Sweep, I actually don't know if we'd be taking this talent. So we're kind of doing this in the assumption that you're getting your 4-piece bonus. So you'll want to use that after every Eternity Surge that you cast, just because it's going to be a lot of damage. And sometimes you can even save those for when, like, hey, I've got mobility, I need to use movement, but I don't have a hover charge. You can go from there and just cast Azure Sweep on the move. So, but that's kind of the basic rotation, is you want to always tip the scales on your Eternity Surge, rank 1 Breath of Fire pretty much in all situations, spend your Mass Disintegrates as best and quickly as you can. With Dragon Rage, you want to make sure that you have your Empower spells up or very close to up, so that you use them and you Dragon Rage before you use your Empowered, so that you can gain the extended duration on your Dragon Rage when you use your Empowered spells. And then you just Living Flame as filler in between and go from there. So spec has a really straightforward damage profile in Scale Commander. The big thing is that Disintegrate if you're using it outside of hover. It's not usable on the move, but if you are hovering, let me just grab this. So like you see, I Disintegrate and then I move and it cancels it. However, if I hover and Disintegrate, you can move it. So there is real value in having hover up as much as humanly possible, especially in periods where you do have to move. So knowing and anticipating that is going to be really good. You can't just hover in, all the time and expect, and then when you need it most, you're going to be out. But because hover has a really good uptime level in Scale Commander, Azure Strike outside of Azure Sweep really shouldn't be used unless you don't have a hover and you need to move, but you still want to do a little bit of damage. That's when you Azure Strike. All right, let's talk about the stats for Devastation Evoker. So coming out of the last patch, we were a crit haste spec, and guess what? That hasn't changed. You're still going to be crit haste. Haste, even with the Apex talent, still holds a lot of value because in that time frame between Dragon Rages, you still want to be able to cast things. It'll affect dot tick rates on like Fire Breath, and even does things like reduces the cast time for your 2 empowered spells. So stats hasn't really changed a ton. Mastery is still like fine. You can still, if you have like a haste mastery piece that's like 10 item levels above your haste crit piece, that's an upgrade, even though it's not the best secondary stats. In that case, it's because intellect overpowers a lot. I talked about this in the Augmentation Evoker video, but one thing I think the UL community generally does is they will refuse to take like 10 to 15 item level upgrades because they're like, oh, they're my worst secondary stats. The truth is that piece that is a verse mastery piece, for example, that's, instead of being item level 165, it's item level 200. That's an upgrade damage wise because intellect still rules all. And I've seen people actually be like, no, I'm not using that piece. It's verse mastery and haste crit are my best stats. And I'm like, but it's a 30 item level upgrade, dog. Like, use it. It's going to be good because intellect ultimately rules all when it comes to being primary stats. Why it's called primary stat. So knowing that haste and crit are your kind of preferred secondary stats, this is going to allow us to talk about your enchants and consumables now, and it'll make sense as to why the choices that we're making here are what they are. So weapon enchant, you're going to want to use the primary stat chant, which is the Acuity of the Rendorai, which gives you 67 primary stat on a proc. Obviously intellect rules all, so you want to make sure that you're using that. The helm and shoulder enchants are the tertiary stat enchants of wrist and cloak that we had last expansion. They just changed the slot on them for boredom reasons, I guess. And so you're going to want the avoidance enchants, the empowered rune of avoidance and Emirdrasil's Grace, which give you more avoidance. Evoker doesn't have a lot of passive leech, so stacking more leech to give you a ton of self-healing is not going to be necessary, and you have good mobility already through hover, deep breath, and glide, that I don't think speed actually does a lot for this spec. On the chest, you're going to want Mark of the World Soul, which gives you that 50 primary stat. The Sunfire Silk Spell Thread, tongue twister, gives you the 41 intellect and 115 stamina on your leg piece, so you want to put one of those on. For your boots, Lynx's Dexterity gives you more avoidance and extra stamina. And then for your ring enchant, you're going to want Nature's Fury, which gives you the critical strike chance. However, if you have high crit but a little bit lower haste, grabbing the haste enchant is also going to be perfectly viable. Just check your stats page, see which one it is that you need more of, and ring enchant with that. For gems, the Indecipherable Eversong Diamond is going to be your primary stat gem. You want to grab that. That's 32 primary stat. And then for your other ones, you can grab the Flawless Quick Garnet, which is the high crit, low haste, or the Masterful Garnet, which is going to be high crit or low mastery if you are already sitting at like a lot of haste already. The Quick Garnet is going to probably be the safest choice until you're starting to get like mostly best in slot geared, even if you're on like full hero track. From the standpoint of your alchemy and cooking consumables, Flask of the Shattered Sun or Flask of the Magisters, which are the crit or the haste one. Honestly, I pick whichever secondary stat is lowest and put that flask on. So for me right now, I'd be putting it on crit with my measly 155 crit rating versus my nearly 500 haste rating. So I'd be grabbing a Shattered Sun flask and rolling with it. For combat potion, the Potion of Recklessness is going to be your best option here because it gives you 1725 of your highest stat while losing your lowest secondary stat, which generally speaking should be versatility. Obviously grab your Silver Moon health potions because they don't share cooldown with your combat potions, so you're able to have more ways to sustain yourself between health potions, warlock cookies, your defensives, and your 2 healing spells. 3 technically if you count Living Flame. Lots of ways to keep yourself alive. Weapon buff, you want the Thalassian Phoenix Oil because it gives you your 2 best stats, crit and haste. You can get a hold of the Augment Runes. The Void Touch Augment Rune is the ones that you're going to want. And then from a food buff standpoint, you're going to want the Herondar Celebration, which gives you a primary stat, or the Keldori Medley, which gives you 64 of your highest secondary stat. Those are going to be obviously the Celebration with primary stat, and the Stamina is generally going to be the best. All right, let's talk about weapons and trinkets that you should be targeting this patch. Now with weapon stuff, from the standpoint of two-hander versus like one hand with a offhand weapon, that matters way less to casters than it does to like melee. For example, like Windwalker Monk has the dual wield versus two-hander argument going on right now. It matters less. It's more about like weapon availability, what has the best stats that you want, and is there a powerful cantrip weapon out there? Or a weapon that's involved in like a tier set like we saw with Maniforge Omega's Void Spire staff and the Diamante Core trinket. In this case, there's not really anything that kind of meets all those criteria, so you're just looking for the best weapons that have the stats that you want. And one of those weapons is actually coming off of Beleren out of the March and Kill the Niche raid. So this will be the last weapon that comes, or the last one that comes out from a raid perspective. So this weapon here, this Bella Maloran, not Fella Maloran, the Fire Mage artifact weapon, sorry. This has Haste Mastery on it, which, you know, a lot of people are like, wait, didn't you just say Haste Crit was good? But yeah, Mastery's still not bad. So this weapon, if you can happen to get it at a really high tier, high track on hero track or myth track, is going to be really, really good. The other weapon that's going to be really nice for you is coming out of Masara Caverns, and that is the Ceremonial Hexblade, which gives you the haste and crit that you're looking for. So really, I'd say like any weapon that you can get that has haste crit or strong, or if you have a lot of crit, a strong haste mastery weapon is also really good. Crafting is also out there as well with either a staff or weapons. Staff or daggers, and I believe we can use swords, right? Yeah, swords or even a one-handed mace. You know, you can use that. So like I said, mainly you're just looking for something that has good crit haste. There's not like for Demon Hunters, there's a Warglaive that comes off of the last boss of the March and Keldanas. That's really good for all the specs. They're all going to be chasing it. There's no such, because it has like a cosmic damage proc. There's no such weapon for Evoker this patch that kind of fits that. So you're just looking for the ones that have like the closest thing to your best weapons as possible. The Bella Maloran, if you have like a lot of the quote unquote best gear, where you're going to be really high on your crit rating already, that's where the mastery starts to become more valuable. But you can also just come chase this Hexblade and try to find maybe some other ways to balance out your stats. From an offhand standpoint, you're going to be going to Verasius, the second boss of the Void Spire raid, the first raid coming out this patch. That's going to be Gwimrar of the Eternal Light, obviously an offhand with high crit haste. Again, crafted weapons are also on the table. You can talk to your scribes to craft you the staff or the offhand, and you can talk to your blacksmiths to craft you the dagger, sword, or mace if you so choose to do so. If you want to use your sparks for that reason to kind of give you that boost early on, especially if you're not going to necessarily think that you're going to get a myth track weapon early on, doing Gilded Crest Grind and then crafting a weapon is going to be one of the biggest jumps that you can make from a crafting perspective. So that's always an option that's on the table. But if you happen to be able to get one of these items, especially if you can get them at myth track because you're doing that level of content, then it'll save you the crests and you can use them to craft and fill in the other gear slots. All right, let's talk trinkets. So there's a couple of trinkets here that I think, actually there's quite a few trinkets that are really good, but there's two in particular that I think are going to really stand out. One of them, if you've seen any of my other guide videos, you know I'm going to talk about it, and that is coming off of the Dream Rift with Chimerius, and that is the Gaze of the Almseer. The mastery on equip, when you equip it, is like okay, but big thing is the primary stat proc that you gain, the 29 intellect for 12 seconds that can't overlap and stack with each other. So with good procs, you can gain a lot of intellect really quickly. This trinket is just always good. There's not a situation where it sucks. There's not a situation, you know, like there are some trinkets that are good in Mythic Plus, but not in Raid, and vice versa. This trinket's not that. This is just good all the damn time. So as soon as this raid opens, I'd be going and killing this boss on the highest difficulty that you can, so that even if you don't get it on the drop, you can get it on the vault. And you're going to want to see this trinket until you get it. You want to see this trinket in your vault every week until you can get it at the highest track possible. It is very, very good. The other really good trinket, and I think these are the two that kind of really stand out, is going to come from Veilgore, and that's Veilgore's Final Stare. And that's mainly because you're gaining the mastery over this. These hidden enemies thing, who cares? But the mastery on this is really good. It's a high number at 1000 mastery at this, with this stat setup, is like really powerful. And because you're getting a lot of crit through your gear, starting to have mastery procs through your trinkets and stuff like that may start to be valuable, especially as you get into higher end content, or you get into higher end gear levels, where you start to see that mastery value starts to increase when you start hitting some of the higher caps on your haste and crit. Another really good trinket, you can macro this to your Dragon Rage and just use it with your Dragon Rage cooldown. The cooldown of the trinket and the cooldown of Dragon Rage don't line up perfectly, but holding the trinket for 30 seconds so you can line it up with your Dragon Rage is never going to be a bad thing, especially because Dragon Rage gives you like the full benefit from your mastery, regardless of target health, while you're in the Dragon Rage cooldown. So gaining more mastery, which gives you more damage, quote unquote, the higher the target's health is, when you combine that with your Dragon Rage, where you're gaining the full benefits of your mastery, this is just giving you even more. It's a really powerful surge of damage. Now, there are some trinkets that if you can't get those, you can make it work. And one of the other ones is coming out of the March of Keldon East, the Midnight Falls encounter, which is the Lura encounter. And that is going to be this Shadow of the Empyrean Requiem, which gives you a cosmic damage proc and then a ton of haste in the execute phase, which typically for Devastation Evokers is where they're at their weakest, because that's when their mastery is the weakest. But gaining, 12,000 haste, really, really good. Really good. So you can definitely go and chase that. Out of dungeons, there are a couple that you want to go farm Windrunner Spire for, which, funny enough, they happen to be in the Season 1 dungeon pool. And that is going to be the Heart of Wind, which gives you a haste proc for 10 seconds. Passive trinket that gives you some extra haste, really nice. And off of Ember Dawn, you can grab this trinket, which gives you extra haste when you use it. Again, you can tie it to your Dragon Rage to give you more haste in your Dragon Rage. To combine with your Apex talent, you're going to get a surge of haste. It does reduce one of your other stats for 120 for 10 seconds. So if it reduces crit, you're kind of SOL, but still a really good trinket that you can grab. And then, believe it or not, at least for now, the Dark Moon deck hunt is pretty good if you have the money to go out and get it all. Basically what this does is this gives you 12 secondary stats for 15 seconds, depending on the creature type. It's a good trinket early on, but I think it's going to fall off, especially once we get into the ability to obtain Raid and Mythic Plus gear. So as I record this, it's Mythic Zero time, where you can do your Mythic Zeros once a week. If you happen to have the money and the desire to, or the ability to go chase all the cards, you can go chase all the cards and give you a trinket that's going to set you up for success early in the raid, once Voidspire releases. But once you're getting access to some of these other trinkets, I think the Dark Moon Dominion Hunt trinket is going to fall off the table in terms of its viability. But I want to be very clear on what you could use to get started, and this is a good starter trinket that you can go craft. If you choose to do so, you just have to find an inscriptionist that has the ability to make it. So but really, yeah, Gaze of the Almseer, Veilgore's Final Stare, Shadows of the Empyrean Requiem, Emberwing Feather, and Heart of Wind. Those are the 5 trinkets that I think you should really target long term for your Devastation Evoker setup here. And the Dark Moon deck, like I said, it's a good way to boost you early on, but not necessarily one that I would use long term at all. So that is the Devastation Evoker guide. If you want to see me play Devastation Evoker, I will be doing that, particularly as we get into the late spring and early summer, once my DH that I'm maining for my guild purposes is all kind of geared out. I will be playing a lot of Evoker here, as I want to get to 3K on all 3 specs of Evoker, as well as all 3 specs of Demon Hunter. So that's a goal that I have set for myself this season. So I will be playing a lot more Evoker. You can follow me along at twitch.tv/workstv if you like to watch on Twitch, or here on this YouTube channel if you prefer to watch on YouTube, where I stream generally Tuesday through Friday most weeks. So schedule's always subject to change. Once the raid season kicks off, I'll be streaming from around 5 or 6 o'clock to Central Time to the end of raid, which generally is going to go until about 10:30 or 11. Obviously, I'm currently unemployed, but if I get a job and my schedule changes, I'll make sure to announce that. And you can follow me on all my social medias that have been rotating here on the bottom right of your screen, or you can join my Discord, go into my Twitch chat and do !Discord, and we'll go from there. I'm going to update the invite link today. So until the next video, hope you all stay safe. Hope you enjoy yourself. You're having fun. You keep on gaming, and we'll see you next time.